Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the awarding of the third annual Lux et Veritas Faculty Prize. My name is Trevor McKay, and I am the president of the William F. Buckley Jr. Program at Yale. The William F. Buckley Jr. Program is the flagship program of the Buckley Institute, an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity at Yale. Our efforts over the years have created a robust space for students to engage in intellectually open and respectful dialogue and to hear all sides of issues. However, the Buckley Institute realized that improving the free speech environment at Yale would take more than just working with the student body. With that in mind, we launched the Lux et Veritas Faculty Prize in 2022, hoping to change the mindset of the faculty lounge as well. The prize recognizes a Yale faculty member who actively fosters intellectual diversity for students both inside and outside of the classroom. Someone who goes above and beyond to promote engagement and good faith with different points of view and respectful discourse among students. An educator who creates a classroom environment where students feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and their ideas openly, and who cultivates the skill of genuine critical thinking in students. Earlier this year, we asked students, faculty, and alumni to nominate Yale faculty who best represent what we're looking for in our Lux et Veritas Faculty Prize honorees. After receiving nominations for 47 different faculty across the college and several of the graduate schools, a panel of judges selected a winner who stood out for promoting debate and discussion in the classroom, good faith engagement with differing opinions, and for encouraging students to think critically about the issues that truly matter. It is my pleasure to introduce the winner of the 2024 Lux et Veritas Faculty Prize, Dr. Gregory M. Collins. Dr. Collins is a lecturer and interim director of undergraduate studies in the program on ethics, politics, and economics, and Department of Political Science at Yale University. His first book, Commerce and Manners in Edmund Burke's Political Economy, examined Edmund Burke's understanding of the connection between markets and morals. Dr. Collins' two current projects are a book manuscript exploring the idea of civil society in early Black political thought and an anthology on the intellectual origins of liberalism and conservatism. He was the 2020 winner of the Acton Institute's Novak Award. Dr. Collins was praised by students who said he pushes students to set aside their preconceived biases and be open to new ideas. Dr. Collins asked sharp questions to students who were dismissive of conservative and originalist thinkers, ensuring that these ideas were taken seriously. One student commented, "From the first class, Professor Collins encourages students not to self-censor, and to engage honestly with the course material." And Dr. Collins' method works. "In my 4 years at Yale," another student noted, "I never felt as free to speak my mind as I did in Professor Collins' class." Yet another student summed it up quite well. "Professor Collins has fostered the most open intellectual environment I have experienced in an academic setting at Yale." And the Buckley Institute is proud to celebrate educators who make an extra effort to support real learning in the classroom. By respecting different points of view and encouraging their students to do the same, by defending open debate and discussion, and by imbuing in the student body an appreciation for truth and the integrity it requires, Lux et Veritas Faculty Prize winners help Yale realize the true purpose of education. Dr. Gregory Collins does just that. The Buckley Institute is delighted to award the 2024 Lux et Veritas Faculty Prize, including a $10,000 cash prize and a commemorative plaque to Gregory Collins.
Thank you for that generous introduction. I would first like to extend my deep gratitude to the Buckley Institute and for those who nominated me for the award. The Institute continues to do fantastic work in fostering an academic environment that encourages vigorous debate, dialogue, and intellectual variety in the pursuit of truth. Bill Buckley, the Yale alum and inspiration for the Buckley Institute, once said that conservatives' emphasis on the market becomes, quote, boring and repetitious, akin to, for lack of a better term, because my two young daughters are in the audience, physical intimacy. Without wading into relationship advice, because I'm sure you're not here to listen to me to talk about relationship advice, I'll say at the very least that intellectual homogeneity also gets very boring and repetitious, especially when it pulls us away from glimpsing the good, the true, and the beautiful. But enough of the pleasantries. Where is he? Thomas Collins, Dad.
Yes, Dr. Collins, what would you like?
And pardon, I've good number of students here who have probably are sick of these images, so bear with me. I'm going to do this with new students. Dad, which garden is more beautiful, this one or that one?
Did you go to the original one again? And now the other one? So my initial reaction is, that one is more beautiful. I like the colorful flowers. I like, I know nothing about architecture, but just the way the house is fine. The other one impresses me as a miniature golf course with trees and lake hazard. Although I must say, looking at this one the second time, it is somewhat intriguing to see that water in the back, which I didn't notice the first time. But I would still vote for the first one as being more beautiful, more my sense of aesthetics. Although I like miniature golf too.
Like miniature golf too. All right, thank you, Dad. Briefly, Mom, which one's more beautiful?
I like the second one, which I think I'm agreeing with Dad.
Oh.
Interesting, but it's, I think obviously what's beautiful is kind of such a subjective term in a way, like in terms of what is beauty and stuff like that. I happen to really love colors, so I really like all the colors in this one. The other one seemed more monochromatic to me. I mean, it was much more symmetrical, much more organized, but I think this was organized. The second one was organized as well in its own way. Certainly more than I could have done.
So both have some sense of order, just different types of order.
Just different types of order, but I think it's clear that work went into both of these. I don't know how many people worked on each, but that people really thought and worked on this. It was not just the way I probably would have done a garden.
Okay, and finally, just briefly, Sis Nicole, which one's more beautiful?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Collins. Let's just say, like, the second one is really giving, like, Miss Honey from Matilda vibes. The first one, it's giving, like, mid-golf in Dedham, Massachusetts. I would say the first one is more beautiful.
More beautiful. Okay, thank you. That's the first time she's ever called me Dr. Collins before. So, as some of you may know, probably sick of me saying this, these two different types of gardens, the English garden here, the French garden here, represents two different kinds of thinking about society and human nature. The English garden representing organic growth, evolutionary development, order as emerging from the spontaneity of the flowers in the bushes, reflecting the idea of custom, while this garden, the gardens at Versailles in France, represent, as some of my family members were suggesting, order, proportion, conveying the idea of individual reason and the intellect. I suggest, and this metaphor was used in the 18th century to connote these different divisions of society. I suggest that we can't understand custom, represented by the English garden, unless we also understand reason, represented by the French garden, and vice versa. It's difficult to apprehend reality without putting these two in conversation with one another, because we are deprived of the strengths and weaknesses of both approaches when we do understand human nature, when we try to study human nature and society. Now, this discussion of custom and reason is the example of the dialectic I try to facilitate in my classroom, which I'll soon discuss. But first, allow me to say my additional thank yous. Credit to the prize really goes to my students. Many of you who are here, great to see you guys, really appreciate it, who have taken my intellectual provocations in the classroom in good faith and run with them. My most recent student evaluations this past spring, under the weaknesses section, said that hold on to your seats, said that I have, quote, high expectations for my students. I will wholeheartedly take this as a weakness, especially if my students continue to embrace the robust exchange of ideas that they have displayed in the past 5 years I've been teaching at Yale. And thank you to everyone else in the room, particularly my wife and kids. Grace and Madeline, wave hi. Wave. Stop coloring. My parents and sisters, friends, and former teachers and the like. You all had a part in this award as well, including Grace and Madeline, who actually taught me about the bad type of intellectual diversity. It goes like this. Every morning, I will go, Grace and Madeline, what would you like for breakfast? Grace will go, a toasted peanut butter sandwich with sliced bananas inside the sandwich, along with pancakes with whipped cream, maple syrup, and strawberries on top. While Madeline will go, a not toasted peanut butter sandwich with sliced bananas on the side, not in the sandwich, along with waffles, not pancakes, without whipped cream, but with maple syrup and blueberries on the side. As I will soon discuss, I am for many types of intellectual diversity, but this is the kind I firmly oppose, especially when trying to get kiddies ready in the morning. And in this sense, as a parent, I'm proudly a proponent of intellectual homogeneity. One main option for breakfast, one fruit on the side is my ideal intellectual atmosphere before 8 a.m. But all kidding aside, credit also goes to my family, who are in the audience. My awareness of the intellectual credibility of different political perspectives emerged during family dinner discussions, or as some may call them food fights, when my parents and siblings would debate politics and the like. And admittedly, I perhaps have the genetic instincts for intellectual debate. Consider a story in family lore. During one New Year's Day party at a family friend's house many years ago, my father got in a huge argument with a hoity-toity party attendee in the living room over the ethics of the Bush administration's waterboarding practices, which was the single most controversial policy in America back then. One by one, other attendees at the party began sitting down on the couches and chairs in the living room, numbering up to 20 or so, turning their inquisitive ears and prying eyes toward these two caterwauling blowhards. Now, mind you, this is supposed to be a tranquil, easygoing New Year's Day party, radiating conversation, joy, and brotherhood. But instead, here my dad and someone else are going toe-to-toe, round by round, on an intensely provocative issue at the time, in between bites of their veggie dip, ranch dressing hanging off their mouths as they debate the existential meaning of the word torture, and surrounded by curious friends and horrified host family members at that. And not only that, here's the kicker. Soon thereafter, when I went to get a drink near the kitchen, I overheard one woman lean over to the other woman and whisper in her ear, "Did you hear that, man? That's Sandy, my mother, that's Sandy's husband." In hushed tones, like she was talking about my father as if he were a convict just released from prison. Point being, I have appreciated this quality about my family that has stuck with me throughout the years. The willingness, nay, the eagerness to engage in discussion with others in a passionate and rigorous manner. Accordingly, my lecture today will attempt to capture the spirit of inquiry by discussing the responsibility of the instructor to expand the terms of debate, present competing perspectives in their best possible light, foster a positive signaling effect in the classroom, and teach an appreciation for the Western canon, all in the pursuit of truth. It will conclude by emphasizing how these guiding principles breed the right type of character in a person beyond any intellectual benefit one might derive from them. First, expanding the terms of debate. My attempt to draw out the tension between custom and reason and highlight some of their strengths and weaknesses can be thought of as an example of the concept of the Overton window. This idea, proposed by the late political scientist Joseph Overton, argued that there was a scope of acceptable political views that politicians should not veer from. What I try to do in the classroom is to expand this window by broadening the terms of debate. One of the first times I really noticed this dynamic was when I was an undergraduate taking a course by Hadley Arkes, whom some of you may know as a political philosopher, one of the leading scholars on constitutional theory and natural law. To this day, I vividly remember him call on one student, have him or her stand up in front of the class, which is maybe 50 or so students, and engage in a vigorous Socratic dialogue with the student on any and all issues ranging from law to war to abortion to Lincoln. He would challenge the student, poke the student, prod the student, force the student to reconsider the philosophical premises of his or her prevailing opinions, and he did so in a way that taught the entire class about the multi-layered dimensions of the topic at hand. Now, I would like to think I'm not as cruel as Professor Arkes. I do not force students to stand up and bark at them in front of the classroom, and I say that in the most positive light, Professor Arkes, if you're listening to this. But I do try to push their thinking, have them closely re-examine their presuppositions about politics and philosophy and law and political economy in a way that gets us closer to touching the truth. And one of the best ways to do this is, in fact, expand the terms of debate over political, social, and economic topics. What do I mean by expanding the terms of debate? It means assigning readings, discussing thinkers, and examining concepts from across the ideological spectrum in order to broaden the Overton window and give intellectual credibility to these perspectives, rather than confining the course material to a monolithic viewpoint or at least to a narrow body of views that hold shared premises. To take another example beyond the custom reason tension, in my con law class, my students and I give serious consideration to both majority and dissenting opinions of Supreme Court cases regarding a variety of justices regarding a variety of controversial cases involving subjects such as corporations' constitutional rights, religious liberty, employment discrimination, and eminent domain. Regarding corporations' constitutional rights, for instance, when we discussed Citizens United, which was the case that granted corporations political free speech rights, we read both the majority opinion of Anthony Kennedy and the dissenting opinion of John Paul Stevens. And we do this for a whole host of cases while sprinkling in some concurring opinions and additional literature. Now, admittedly, this may be a commonsensical way to teach constitutional law, but the important point is that by giving voice to these varying perspectives on thorny issues, we affirm the intellectual legitimacy of their views, even if we are not fully persuaded by them. This, I believe, is the first step toward reviving thoughtful debate and dialogue on college campuses. Consider another example, my course on black political thought. I will assign African-American thinkers from a range of ideological perspectives, spanning from Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois, to Booker T. Washington, Zora Neale Hurston, and Thomas Sowell. Just as we rightfully give serious consideration to the ideas of Douglass and Du Bois, we should also give serious consideration to the ideas of Washington and Hurston and Sowell. Doing so conveys to students that unconventional wisdom can be just as intellectually credible as dominant modes of opinion. Placing such thinkers in conversation with one another inspires spirited philosophical dialogue, including one of the best discussions I've ever facilitated as a professor. Two students, one of whom happens to be in the audience. Ben, raise your hand. There he is. Ben, he was involved in this. They engaged in a vigorous debate over conceptions of guilt in the Bible to support or oppose reparations. Although both students practiced the Christian faith, they arrived at different conclusions on this topic. Nevertheless, it was one of the single best exchanges between students of mine I'd ever witnessed. They carried out their dialogue in a respectful manner, they considered each other's points on good faith, and they carefully grounded their reasoning in the course material. And I do take pride in promoting this kind of vibrant yet civil environment of intellectual inquiry in my classroom. Widening the terms of debate also means that students might be surprised to learn that they agree with at least some of a thinker's ideas without fully embracing all of them. For instance, although most students may not be completely on board with Thomas Sowell's classical liberal and conservative views, I have found that some students have been attracted to his commentary on how inequalities and disparities emerge from complex geographical, historical, social, and economic factors that cannot be reduced to a single explanation. While others have been piqued by his scholarship on the proud history of autonomous black educational institutions. And even other students were surprised to learn that he was African American in the first place. Yet perhaps the greatest example of expanding the terms of debate in a classroom is in my seminar called The Intellectual Origins of Liberalism and Conservatism, which I just taught this afternoon. Some students are here, from which the English Garden and French Garden distinction emerges. In this class, we probe the roots of political ideologies by studying the late 18th century debate in England over the French Revolution, which was sparked by Edmund Burke's pamphlet Condemning the Revolution, Reflections on the Revolution in France. I assign this text as well as writings from Burke's critics, such as Thomas Paine, Mary Wollstonecraft, and James Mackintosh. Just as Burke exposed flaws in the writer's support for the revolution, Paine, Wollstonecraft, and Mackintosh also exposed lingering ambiguities in Burke's attack on the revolution. Putting these figures in conversation with one another illuminates their strengths and limits as thinkers, and it also once again gives a measure of heightened credibility to their views on custom and reason, human nature, tradition, and so on. Now, there is no hard and fast rule in my judgment determining what are and what are not acceptable terms of debate. Generally speaking, if an idea consciously targets a specific person or group of people based on pure animus and arbitrary characteristics, that is a sign that the idea holds little to no pedagogical or intellectual value. In addition, the form in which these terms are conveyed matter as well. Twitter, or X, is in many ways a free marketplace of ideas. Think hundreds of millions of my daughters tweeting out their breakfast preferences in more colorful language. But the structure of this medium is intended to fuel heated hot takes and ad hominem posts that leave no time for deliberation. And as someone who has listened to his fair share of Boston sports talk radio, Greg from Needham, and as someone who may have called up those Boston sports talk radio stations to convey his latest hot takes on the Patriots and Red Sox and Celtics and so on, I'm well aware of the lack of nuance, let's say, in the hot take industry. But in most other cases, I certainly encourage the stretching of the Overton window as long as these views are expressed in a thoughtful, deliberative, and responsible manner. Furthermore, the point isn't even to set in stone a formulaic pro-con, for-against debate-style format in the classroom, if for no other reason than reality contains many dimensions, not just two, and that not all ideas are of course, equally true. On one single issue, there may be a number of credible and persuasive opinions. This is precisely why expanding the terms of debate to include an additional perspective, and then a perspective after that, is so important. It demonstrates that social reality is a complicated phenomenon that cannot be reduced to a single and fixed mode of thought. There are inevitable trade-offs, degrees of complexity, and a multitude of cultures and peoples in society that require a sensitive appreciation of these varying and oftentimes clashing beliefs, opinions, and customs. It follows that these broader terms of debate might encourage strange intellectual bedfellows, such as progressives and traditional conservatives' shared apprehensions toward the monetization of social relations, or to take another common law case, Keeler v. New London, which allowed the city of New London right here in Connecticut to seize private property for an economic development project. In this case, progressives might find some common ground with Clarence Thomas and his criticisms of 20th century urban renewal programs for generating a negative impact on urban communities. Or progressives and libertarians might hold overlapping views on the individual right to privacy. Simply put, expanding the terms of debate shows to students that there is a whole other world of rich ideas, concepts, interpretations, and thought out there that they might find some attraction to if they're exposed to them. The additional way to expand the terms of debate doesn't even have to do directly with liberal or conservative arguments. It has to do with being aware of the prevailing body of opinion on a topic that a thinker is attempting to combat. Framed differently, you really don't know the true significance of an idea until you know what it is arguing against. In this light, one is reminded of the famous quotation of John Stuart Mill, who is often referenced in these sorts of discussions on free speech. Now, I believe that Mill's legacy on this point remains ambiguous overall, since he was also guilty of fueling a pleasant narrative of an intellectual elite spreading enlightenment and knowledge to the seemingly knuckle-dragging masses, such as sports radio callers like myself. But in any event, his famous quotation on liberty, some of you have heard of this, I think is still helpful. Quote, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion. Nor is it enough that he should hear the opinions of adversaries from his own teachers, presented as they state them, and accompanied by what they offer as refutations. He must be able to hear them from persons who actually believe them. He must know them in their most plausible and persuasive form." This quotation can be applied both to one's own views and to the views of a thinker who is being studied. To take a famous example from today, in fact, we discussed this. John Locke's Two Treatises of Government is widely read as one of the most famous statements in defense of liberalism in modern political thought, issuing a robust endorsement of individual rights, bodily autonomy, and the social contract. But fewer people read the writing that prompted Locke to write this book, one of which was Robert Fillmore's Patriarcha, which advocated absolute monarchy, the divine right of kings, and paternal authority, while criticizing social contract theory, popular sovereignty, and other modern liberal political ideas. Now, as a red-blooded American patriot, by no means am I a monarchist. But it is crucial to read Locke in light of Fillmore, for it was Fillmore, not Locke, I suggest, whose views were more closely reflected traditional conceptions of human nature, the family, and social order. Namely, that society was a divinely sanctuared and hierarchically ordered whole, and that political legitimacy should not derive from popular will alone, if at all. Placing their ideas in conversation with one another, much like the French Revolutionary debates, brings out the strengths and weaknesses of their arguments in their fullest complexities. Does Locke place too much emphasis on the voluntary nature of social relations? Does Fillmore place too much emphasis on hierarchy? And so on. Facilitating this dialogue also helps to appreciate the sheer novelty of these thinkers' ideas. Lockean liberalism, while considered to be an inborn trait of modern liberal democracies, was in many ways a radical philosophical project that threatened core premises of Western political thought. Burke's attack on the French Revolution was in many ways a radical attempt to expose the flaws of such Lockean notions of social contract theory that gained sway in the 18th century. In essence, placing thinkers in conversation with one another highlights that A, they were engaging not in abstract debates, but real debates with real consequences. B, they articulated competing yet credible points of view. And C, once again, this exercise expands the Overton window of acceptable philosophical discussion in the classroom. On a similar note, being aware of the prevailing terms of debate that thinkers challenge also cautions against hubris. The principles we hold dear today in the abstract, such as democracy and equality, were by no means destined to triumph, and their advocates were up against immense forces that resisted these ideas, some forces of which served as crucial tools in encouraging healthy critical reflection on the ideas. Consider Bill Buckley's famous words. You've heard these words. Quote, "A conservative is someone who stands athwart history, yelling stop at a time when no one is inclined to do so or to have much patience with those who so urge it." Now consider Cass Sunstein's, the Harvard law professor and former Obama administration regulatory czar. Consider his less famous, though, as telling words. Quote, "Liberals look forward as well as backward. They like to think that the arc of history bends towards justice." William F. Buckley Jr. said that his preferred form of conservatism is, quote, "stands athwart history, yelling stop." Liberals ask history to explain its plans, and they are prepared to whisper go. Now, regardless of whether one whispers go or not, or regardless of whether one whispers that's Sandy's husband or not, an awareness of the credibility of ideas between clashing thinkers, Filmer and Locke, Burke and Payne, and so on, cools the temptation to adopt this rigid binary as an existential contest between progress and reaction, to assume that only one side of an argument is legitimate and the other illegitimate, to think that the right side of history is preordained and the other is destined to be confined to the dustbin of history, to believe that the latest idea is always the most morally pure and any idea that came before it is morally corrupt. And it discourages intellectual arrogance and utopianism by alerting oneself of the weaknesses and ambiguities in his or her own lines of reasoning, weaknesses and ambiguities that might stand to benefit from adopting some of the insights of other thinkers from different ideological perspectives. In essence, to quote from Buckley and Sunstein, it helps to understand why some people whisper go and others yell stop, and vice versa. You really don't know the true significance of democracy until you know its inherent strengths and weaknesses. You don't know the true significance of equality until you know the promise and dangers of trying to promote abstract equality in a diverse society. And you don't really know the true significance of liberty until you know the benefits and perils of advocating it without strong moral and institutional safeguards. This leads me to my third point I wish to make today, and that is what I call the signaling effect, which is closely related to the idea of agenda setting. This notion captures the explicit and implicit ways that instructors signal to students that robust debate and intellectual variety will be supported, fostered, and valued in the classroom in the pursuit of truth. If you set the agenda in this way, it establishes a strong precedent that many views will be welcomed during class discussion and in term papers. I tried to do this on the very first day of class when I asked students to set themselves the goal of making, and I started doing this last year. I asked students to set themselves the goal of making at least one comment during class discussion or take a stand on an issue throughout the semester that provides an interpretation of a concept or thinker that departs from the conventional wisdom of their peers or the assigned readings. Borrowing a page from a political science professor, Brian Garston, who teaches at Yale, I've started also to teach the very first day of class, not by going over the syllabus, but by jumping into an intellectual discussion on a topic in order to signal to the class that vigorous dialogue will be the guiding norm rather than the exception of the course throughout the term. It is also crucial to clarify early on in the semester that it is possible to disagree on a matter in good faith without engaging in ad hominem attacks. I think we've lost the ability to disagree in a firm yet civil manner, but it is absolutely critical for professors to teach and practice this skill. Otherwise, it creates a signaling effect in the opposite direction. It suggests to students that they should not take someone else's arguments in good faith and therefore should avoid confronting it, if not call the student names for holding that view. It teaches that disagreement is unhealthy when oftentimes it can be very healthy. Consequently, saying that these terms early in the term creates an appropriate level of intellectual comfort and discomfort. It shows that students should be comfortable voicing interpretations of the text and thinkers, heterodox or not, but it shows that students should not be comfortable in assuming that they can articulate their views without being challenged. In this sense, intellectual discomfort generates some of the long-term benefits I mentioned. It expands the mind, deepens one's awareness of the limits of his or her own reasoning, alerts us to alternative yet credible perspectives, promotes tolerance, and sharpens our appreciation of the novelty and boldness of thinkers' ideas. Now, perhaps the best way instructors can nourish this signaling effect in the classroom is by presenting arguments and counter-arguments in their best possible light. Not giving the best version of one argument doesn't do justice to that argument, nor to the spirit of intellectual inquiry. It is very easy to create a straw man and then bat it down without much effort. For instance, to use my intellectual origins of liberalism in a conservatism class again, an instructor could teach Burke, perhaps the most famous critic of the French Revolution and political radicalism in modern political thought, as thus, quote, Burke opposed the French Revolution. How could he? Hence he opposed change. He opposed liberty. He opposed equality. He opposed democracy. He opposed progress. He blindly supported tradition. He blindly supported maintaining the status quo. He blindly adored the aristocracy. It would certainly be easy to dismiss such arguments from Burke. But what if Burke were taught in this manner? Quote, he opposed radical change that would wreak social havoc and undermine existing institutions and practices of society that provided tangible goods to the people. But he was also a proponent of reform, understood as taking gradual yet concrete measures to alter or abolish prevailing flaws in civil society so that society could be improved without enduring widespread violence and bloodshed. If half the chairs in this room flipped over to their side, for example, Burke would encourage people to place those chairs upright rather than setting the whole building on fire. Now, there certainly may be flaws in this line of thinking as well, but the point is that it is considerably more difficult to instinctively refute this latter argument than the former characterization of Burke as a blind opponent of change. And I also encourage this practice when advising students on how to write their term paper. At some point in the paper, I tell them, pause and confront, articulate the best version of a counter-argument in opposition to the thesis that you're describing. Similarly, and to Mill's point in his quotation I read, I try to teach thinkers in their best possible light, that is, I adopt their framework. If particular thinkers were around today, how would they present their thoughts and ideas? I would like to think they would communicate them in the most persuasive manner possible. And then after we discuss the thinker's ideas in the context, then I'll facilitate additional discussion on their strengths and weaknesses. Another way instructors can signal clear expectations for vigorous intellectual discussion in the classroom is simply by framing course syllabi and using conceptual language in a fashion that incorporates diverse perspectives and readings that, upon reading the syllabus for the first time, conveys to students that there will be an acceptable range of views in the class that will not be discouraged, even if they are unpopular or heterodox. It is ultimately the intellectual and moral responsibility of the instructor to create the signaling effect in the classroom, to clarify early on that views that challenge conventional wisdom will be cherished, that people can disagree on good faith, that students should present arguments and counter-arguments in their best possible light, and that the Overton window of acceptable thought is wide and deep. Now, expanding the terms of debate, being aware of the prevailing opinions and dogmas, and nurturing a positive signaling effect are all crucial to fostering intellectual variety in the classroom. These guiding principles, however, as important as they are not ends in themselves, but are means to the final intellectual end, which is grasping the good, the true, and the beautiful. For if a free exchange of uninhibited ideas were the standard of truth, then Twitter would be the gold standard for Socratic wisdom. And as anyone who has been on Twitter will tell you, that is like calling Miley Cyrus the gold standard of musicianship, or the New York Jets the gold standard for the NFL. Is it? Any Jets fans in here? Hopefully no Jets fans. Patriots are in first place right now. But as Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9 teach, some of you have heard this, quote, finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. The pursuit of the true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, excellent, and praiseworthy, as ends in themselves, is the ultimate aim of the university and of the student. One chief way to engage in this pursuit is through what is called the Western canon. Now, the Western canon has been under attack recently by attempts to eliminate courses in Western civilization, topple statues, and rename buildings, among various campaigns. My attitude on this topic is this, and shouldn't come as any surprise. The Western canon does provide a rich treasury of wisdom into the pursuit of the true, noble, and good, and by no means should be toppled. Consider the English writer G.K. Chesterton's famous fence parable. Some of you may have heard of this also. Quote, there exists in such a case a certain institution or law, let us say for the sake of simplicity, a fence or gate erected across a road. The more modern type of reformer goes gaily up to it and says, quote, "I don't see the use of this. Let us clear it away." To which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer, "If you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then, when you can come back and tell me what you do see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it." Chesterton's lesson is not that the fence or gate was erected for perfect reasons, nor that they served their purposes perfectly. But it does invite us to be aware of the purpose of any existing institution or practice before attempting to dismantle it, thereby promoting humility, discipline, and moderation. The same applies to the Western canon. Immersion in the canon teaches us that many of the things we benefit from today are the product of a long ancestral inheritance, the pursuit of truth, stemming from Socrates, to the emergence of the family, to the rise of religion, to the great works of architecture, art, and music. Leave aside Miley Cyrus for the moment. Leave aside Miley Cyrus. This canon not only helps us to reach the truth, but is also part of a common language filtered through institutions, customs, and practices accessible to anyone. My paternal grandfather, the father of my father back there, did not have a college education and was held back 3 times in school. But he was also fluent in Shakespeare and philosophy, could play the piano and flute, was an amateur boxer, and was a Renaissance figure in many ways, even though he didn't possess any of the gilded credentials of Yale professors. This inheritance that he and others benefited from is the glue that binds generations to each other. But that doesn't mean the Western canon is perfect. Far from it. Not only do I teach many thinkers in the canon whose views I personally disagree with, but it is also a plain fact that many men and women in the past did not have the opportunity to contribute to this canon because of a myriad of political, social, economic, and cultural and religious reasons. That is why, instead of eliminating the Western canon, we should build on it by incorporating more thinkers that can fill in its gaps and introduce new perspectives that complement and enhance the existing canonical figures, such as the Black Political Thought course I teach in the EP&E program, which is the first course on African-American thinkers offered in the program. As distinguished as the Locks and Burkes of the world were, they simply did not provide, nor could have provided, the depth of insight into culture, race, modern political economy, and other topics as the Frederick Douglasses, Booker T. Washingtons, W.E.B. Du Boises, and Thomas Sowells of the world. And it is this method, building on rather than eliminating or diminishing the Western canon, that can help us think about and appreciate the true, noble, and right in a clearer and more humbling light. In sum, expanding the terms of debate, being aware of the existing political views that thinkers are trying to combat, creating a positive signaling effect, presenting alternative perspectives in their best possible light, and preserving and enhancing the Western canon are methods I have found effective in promoting vigorous intellectual dialogue in the classroom with the final goal of pursuing truth as an end in itself. But even this, I suggest, isn't sufficient. For as much as my colleagues and I in the academy would like to think otherwise, most people in life either are not interested in reading or don't have time to read Plato at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. And these days, neither do I. I'm just trying to finish my Netflix documentary on the unjustly maligned Nickelback band Nickelback. That's my Plato. Most are not going to spend hours upon hours reading the great works of philosophy, literature, and economics. They are, and rightly so, hopefully going to spend more time with their family and friends and neighbors, and hopefully not on TikTok and Instagram too much. All the pedagogical strategies I've discussed today, however, intersect with the shared aim of all human beings, and that is the, quote, the habitual exercise of character. Expanding the terms of debate nourishes intellectual and social tolerance inside and out of the classroom and alerts us to the stubborn yet inescapable trade-offs in society that urge us to resist utopianism. And awareness of prevailing ideas and dogmas strengthens our command of the recurring clash of political ideas and deepens our appreciation of the intellectual courage of thinkers who challenge these views. Being open to disagreement and presenting arguments in their best possible light teaches us that there can be, in fact, good faith disputes that cannot nor should not be reduced to name-calling and caricature. And a deep respect for the Western canon fosters a heightened sense of humility, part of what Chesterton called the, quote, democracy of the dead, alerting us to our rich cultural inheritance from which we benefit from today. All of these effects guard against faith in false gods, resist hubris, puncture the pretensions of presentism, restrain the impulse for violent change, breed gratitude, combat discontentment, prize judgment, impose moral duties, and awaken human beings to the very textures of human affairs. These qualities reflect a saying attributed among various sources to the Lutheran theologian Rupertus Meldenius, quote, "In essentials unity, in non-essentials liberty, in all things charity." The essentials in intellectual debate include humility, gratitude, tolerance, judgment, and the desire to pursue truth as an end. The non-essentials allow for good faith disagreements over contentious issues. But in both essentials and non-essentials, the charitable spirit should be universal. Understood in this light, free speech and vigorous debate in the Overton window and the Western canon, as well as practical activities such as engaging in civic dialogue with your neighbor, participating in local and diverse social and religious associations, and working in businesses, can help us nourish excellence of character as human beings, regardless of whether you ever open up Aristotle or not. And in this sense, all these effects give rise to a liberal disposition, comprehended in its traditional light as generosity, magnanimity, and forbearance. And so, in the end, I encourage all of you to engage in debate, not only for the pursuit of truth, but also for the practice of character. In the classroom, in your dorms, in your dining halls, in your neighborhoods, and if need be, like my father, at New Year's Day parties, in between chomping on veggie sticks, even if you incur the suspicious wrath of those two women whispering in hushed tones, "That's Sandy's husband." Thank you.
So we have some time for a brief Q&A.
Okay.
So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and Professor Collins, feel free to call on questions.
Yes, Sister Nicole, one of my interlocutors growing up.
Yeah, so I'm curious, Dr. Collins, like, do you have a personal limit for the Overton window? In terms of, like, if somebody is presenting a clearly false and moral argument, but doing it in a very respectful way,
Yeah.
and citing sources, etc., like, what is your personal, like, no, like, we're not even going to end?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's why I mentioned, ultimately for me, define the terms of debate. For me, I'm generally pretty liberal about what terms those are. But as I suggested, for me, some of the guiding principles, if it's a clear idea that targets a specific person, a group of people, out of pure animus and hostility, based on completely arbitrary characteristics, I think for me that's one line. And even that, however, an argument can be accused of being based on pure animus when there still be merit to the argument. But again, that's a judgment call. But that's sort of one guiding standard I consider. As well, the form, if an idea is conveyed in a way that is not communicated in a deliberative, thoughtful manner, then either I'll dismiss it or I'll encourage either the student or I hope that the idea will be communicated in a more rational light, even in the written form or in a speech or simply engaging in dialogue with one's neighbor. But ultimately, it's a difficult question, one of judgment, but those are some of the things I think about when I do try to take into account, what is the limit of the Overton window. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Professor Collins.
Thank you very much. I'm curious, obviously you are principally teaching in the political science department here at Yale, but various spheres and departments at Yale obviously are in need of academic freedom and intellectual freedom in the classroom. So where do you think principally in universities across the country this sort of expansion of the Overton window or greater understanding needs to take place? Arts, humanities, political science, social science, STEM.
Yeah. Everywhere. I think ultimately, in all those intellectual areas you named, there's certainly room for growth. And I think the responsibility resides in leadership administrations and department heads, specifically hiring committees to try to take into account the broader Overton window. The problem is that that's not occurring today that I think, to the extent that it should be. But that is where the responsibility ultimately lies. When we talk about conversations about the direction of the university now, I think that responsibility lies in those people who actually have the power to make substantive changes. Until that happens, there's just always going to be room for growth. Yeah. Yeah. That's Kelly, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. I'm sorry. And thank you for the very gracious intellectual environment that you provide for your students. I have a question in regards to classroom atmospheres that are not as gracious, that don't have those signalings that you had mentioned. What steps should students take in ways to be courageous or ways to be, I guess, wise amongst their peers?
Yes,
What do you advise?
Thank you for the question. And so my 5 years teaching at Yale, I have heard from more than a few, if not many students, who have voiced to me in private that there's not the ideal intellectual environment in their classrooms that they feel comfortable with voicing their views. And I also say I certainly understand the incentive structure set up now at the university level in which it does discourage the pursuit of truth in taking into account unconventional wisdom. One, you can channel one's views, or at least bring in, refer to thinkers who are assigned, and try draw out their strengths and weaknesses. And you can ultimately arrive at a judgment on the thinker, even if you yourself, aren't conveying your own personal views. And that's also simply an objective scholarly inquiry, to simply take a step back with a sort of element of detachment and try to pursue truth by drawing out the strengths and limits of the thinkers and concepts that are assigned. Other ways, I think, even to stimulate dialogue in the class with another peer, which is something I've been encouraging in my classrooms, is another way to create this healthy dialectic that could expose some ideas that otherwise would not be communicated in the classroom or amongst your peers outside of the class. And then, of course, outside of the classroom, encourage you to do your own reading and pursue the thinkers that may not be emphasized as much in the classroom environment. But off the top of my head, those are some ways, I think, to expand, at least to expand the Overton window in one's own sort of intellectual atmosphere. Yeah, sorry, Kyle, yeah. Kyle has seen these gardens before.
Thanks, Professor Collins, for this wonderful talk. On the idea of hiring in faculty, do you think that there's a disproportionate amount of administration relative to education that's going on in the classroom? And how do you think universities moving forward might rebalance the learning environment in a way that's more beneficial to the faculty and the students?
Yeah, I think so. And I do think more authority and autonomy, paradoxically, should be given to the instructor, but that also just reinforces the question again, if the instructor's not committed to a robust debate, then is that not counterproductive in the first place? But generally speaking, yeah, absolutely. And the question is about how to restore that balance. Beyond practical procedures, I think just fundamentally, first we need to rethink the purpose and role of the instructor in the classroom itself. Elevate, give that role more value in society, and in these discussions over higher ed reform. And that's certainly harder said than done. There have been various educational reform methods proposed to reduce the expansion of administrative roles at universities. But without getting into the practicalities, at the very least, we need to rethink, how the instructors and professors, they are the ones, in theory, they're the ones who do possess the knowledge and wisdom that they're trying to transmit to the next generation. Until, at the very least, we restore that that idea in people's minds, I think the balance there is going to continue to be an imbalance in higher education. Yes, Will. Will is probably sick of seeing these gardens. Will, which one's more beautiful? He's seen this like 4 times in the past year.
Aesthetically, the French one, but politically, the English one.
So I was wondering, do you think the university should be value neutral, and is that even possible?
In fact, some of you may have received this email who are part of the Yale community. The new president of Yale actually is commissioning a commission on the question of whether Yale should adopt the principle of institutional neutrality or not. In this environment, quite possibly. Traditionally speaking, however, universities, as we know, they were considered to be the leaders setting the moral, intellectual, educational tone for society. And therefore, leadership in that traditional sense certainly requires some moral responsibility to either not necessarily make partisan political stands, but at least set that tone in some way. And so ideally, I think there is certainly a role for that, such as promoting some of the principles I discussed today. But if that's not possible, then at the very least, certainly institutional neutrality is one way to at least discourage the reduction of the university to simply political polarization in society.
Professor Collins, coming from more of like the STEM side of the school, where a lot of students in their courses don't really necessarily get to have the opportunity to engage in necessarily like these like debates that we have in the humanities and social sciences, because a lot of the problems have just true or false answers. How do you encourage the second half of the school to more engage in having and knowing these abilities and capabilities of having these generous discussions with others where they can share their ideas and be told about how there's a gray zone between of being just purely right or purely wrong? Yes,
that's a great question. Where does STEM fall into this conversation? And for the STEM-minded people, I wonder if you do prefer the geometrical proportion garden. I think as a father, I think I'm increasingly more sympathetic to this because it does impose order, authority on nature. As my 2 kids I don't know what they're doing now. But for STEM students, a couple things. One, certainly, do look into courses that do offer these new ideas and thinkers, right? If you have room in course schedule, I encourage you to take them. 2, even outside the formal university setting, there are other institutions that are teaching these thinkers, that are offering seminars, symposia, colloquia, that do make a conscious effort to reach out to your non-social science students, including the Elm Institute is one. Some of you are familiar with the Elm Institute. And they'll host a speaker series, luncheon series, that is intended not only to reach the political science, philosophy, economics majors, but also those outside the majors as well. And also simply, certainly to read on your own. So there are opportunities to do so, even if you need to concentrate in a STEM-related field. And I think that and I also find it very sort of heartening when I give these sorts of talks, and most of the students are majoring in political science, economics, and so on. But there always are some STEM-minded students in those conversations, and this is why I encourage them to do as well. There are opportunities out there for you to pursue your traditional liberal arts education, and it certainly provides a worthy complement to your STEM-related fields, because there's a lot of cross-pollination between questions such as logic, right, abstract logic on one hand, and political ideas such as the garden metaphor on the other hand.
And with that, I hope you will all join me in thanking Professor Collins for his talk today.
Thank you.